Can we edit this out so my husband doesn't hear it?
And bang, we go straight into family relationships.
I mess up a lot, like with my husband, with my mom, with my sister.
We can say some bloody awful things to each other.
Yes.
Because I'm so triggered.
You crazy lady. Families are like fish. They go off after 72 hours. Welcome to the She Word. Conversations that women rarely have, but really should. And I'm going to start off this show with a pretty amazing quote. Harper Lee said in To Kill a Mockingbird, "You can choose your friends, but you sure can't choose your family." Terrible accent. And they're still akin to you no matter whether you acknowledge them or not. And it makes you look right silly when you don't. You might have an amazing family where you get on with them 100% of the time, you never have a crossword, you never have any challenges or issues, but for the rest of us, we are thrown into a dynamic that we don't choose. We don't choose our family, and by that very nature, of course, many issues are going to arise. So today in this show, we're going to discuss the realities of family relationships, the good, the bad, the plain ugly, and the very wonderful. So I am really thrilled to have three amazing guests on this show, and I'm going to take the time to introduce them to you because they're very, very special. My first guest is Dr. Ingrid Lanfranco, a counselling psychologist and family therapist by profession, currently the head of department at Child and Family Studies within the Faculty of Social Wellbeing at the University of Malta. You have over 20 years of experience in the clinical field working with couples and individuals, and I can say from personal experience, you are an absolute Wonder Woman. And I'm really, really thrilled that our journeys have taken us full circle and I'm sitting down here with you. I'm actually quite choked up about it, but I know that it's going to be brilliant having you on this show. Thank you, Ingrid, for being here. I'm going to ask you to say a little bit more about yourself in just a second. Emma Hogg, hello. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. You are not a stranger to the She Word because you've been on our Women in Business edition talking about imposter syndrome, but you were also at that epic live event on stage. And wasn't that just incredible?
You created something very beautiful.
Well, I have to say, I'm not going to take credit for that because we all created something very beautiful. And in actual fact, it was very far from what we originally designed to be that event.
Okay.
But as it was, you know how the universe just comes about and something magical happens. And I remember the conversation that we had on the stage. It was super powerful, absolutely really life-changing. And I said, I need Emma back on this show.
Thank you.
When I asked you, I said, what show would you like? I don't normally say that. I said, what show do you want to come on? And you said this one. And in a second, I'm going to ask you to explain why.
Okay.
But you are the founder of the self-development agency, A Life I Choose. I love that title. You're also a psychotherapist and lifestyle strategist. And as I said, you've been involved in the She Word in a number of aspects. Sarah Stellini, you were on the show last season, Women as Working Mums, and you caused quite a stir with your very straight-speaking style.
Oh my.
It's true, no?
Can we edit this out so my husband doesn't hear it?
And bang, we go straight into family relationships. But you are a CCO of a successful iGaming company. You're a mum of two and a wife, and you know plenty about family dynamics from a mother, child, cousin, extended family relationships and so on. And when I said to you, Sarah, will you come on this show? You said yes, of course. But you're here because you have lived experience as a family member. And this is the most interesting thing about this topic is all of us, one way or another, whether we are in touch with our family or we're not, we do navigate family relationships. And so this is a show for absolutely everybody. So before we dive into it, I'm going to ask you guys, and I'm going to start with you, Ingrid, did I miss anything else out? And why is family relationships so important to you?
I think, as you said, everybody belongs to some form of family. I mean, we immediately think about a perfect family structure or formation, but really and truly, there's such a diversity of family. So in one way or other, we're all part of something. So we're all got experience of some form. And I think there's a wonderful way that people interact with each other, and especially the way people are loyal to their families, even when they cause hardship and pain. So there's ultimately a sense of loyalty to families. And even though we don't choose our families, I mean, we are born into one more often than not. Some people aren't really maybe fortunate to have that. But then the loyalty, I feel, is something that keeps people connected, or they try to keep connected to family in some form. So I think it's amazing to look into families and understand the diversity that they present.
I love the fact that you've just jumped into it with so much positivity. I know I come from the UK, and we tend to have smaller families and families that are not as strong in their structure and their communication as they are here in Malta. When I came to Malta, I was blown away. I mean, there's so many things that are unique to Malta because of its size and the way that the country is structured, and with regards to sort of heritage and so on. But there is this whole idea of family loyalty. I mean, Sarah is related to our makeup artist, for goodness sake. Everybody in Malta is related to everybody in some way or another. And that loyalty is really, really profound. And I'm so glad that we started off on that really positive note. Because what I want to do through the course of the show is look at the challenges, but also come away with some really good ideas to build stronger family relationships or navigate around the challenges. So I'm going to come to you, Emma. Did I miss out anything relating to you when I introduced you?
No, you did great.
Well, fantastic. I'm really glad I did. So then answer my question, please. Why this show? Why did you say, I want this show?
I'm super passionate about family. So I'm a psychotherapist, so I work with relationships all the time. Specifically the relationship with oneself, but the relationship with oneself affects the relationship with everyone else. So I'm very passionate about that. Also, I've become a mom, and since becoming a mom, I find that I'm thinking differently, you know, like you guys know, like you change, like you sort of transform, and I feel like I'm thinking more on a sort of societal level, like how you know, the way we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to our partners, the way we relate to our children impacts society, you know. And you know, at the moment, sort of Malta's going through this difficult time where people are frustrated and unhappy, and I mean, obviously the majority of people, you know, and kind of there's a lot of complaining about the state that Malta is in compared to how we used to be, where it was more island life, and now it's like this dense, overly populated city without the infrastructure for it. So it's frustrating, and you know, kind of I see it all links back to our relationship with ourselves, the ability to transform the state of society, all links back to us. How well can we regulate our emotions? How well do we know ourselves? So on and so forth. I can go into this in more detail. But yeah, so this is like the core, my why of why I care about family.
I'm kind of blown away already that you said that your relationship or your attitude towards family changed when you became a mum.
Yeah.
And we'll look at that in a second. We'll go into that. Sarah, did I miss out anything about you? And why did you say yes to coming on this show?
Your introduction was amazing. Why did I say yes to come to this show? I think something you probably find out is one of my values is family. So for me, family is extremely important. Now, whether it means my immediate family that I created with my husband, or it's my extended family. So I am thinking about it a lot since I've become a mom, which is quite a few years now. But I'm also navigating bringing up children at different stages of life, and I realize and I see certain things that my family have given me, both good and bad. And I'm very aware, maybe hyper aware at this stage, of things that I want to give to my children and things that I don't want to give to my children.
Yeah.
So for me, this is just, so I'm looking for patterns everywhere, and I'm looking to see like what I can give, So this is very interesting to me, especially with two amazing guests that we have here, obviously.
I'm so excited to be having this discussion. I really am genuinely very excited to be talking about this, because again, it kind of goes along the line of the strapline, the conversations that we rarely have but really should. Because I think so often we accept families. We don't question families. We accept behavior. We don't question it. And we accept what we're going to pass on to other members of our family or our children, and we don't question it. And you hearing that you want to discern between what you accepted and what you want to pass on is so cool. So I want to keep positive all the way through this discussion. Ingrid, set the tone. But I do want to address what the common issues are, the most common issues. I did a bit of research, and it said, sibling rivalry, and it said, disassociation with parents and so on. But what are the common issues? I guess I'm going to start with you, Ingrid, that you see as a family therapist, as somebody who deals with family all the time. What are the most common? Because I think a lot of people in families, we think that we're the only one.
No, I mean, there's not just one issue. There's a diversity of issues. I think one of the biggest issues and the most common in families and couples, in dyads of families, is communication. Probably the biggest, that people don't really listen to each other, or people take each other for granted, or the way conflict is managed. Conflict is normal, but then the way it's managed, getting one's message across and being heard and understood, and getting the right, responding to each other in a way that is helpful. So in the context of therapy, for example, I come across a lot, and in a way nearly need to coach people on how to listen to each other, and what kind of response would be useful in such a situation. What do you need to listen to from your partner or from your parent? And there isn't enough awareness about it, I think. And I think something like communication needs to start when children are still really young at school. It's a skill. It doesn't happen automatically. It's what we see, and it's what we're exposed to. And unless we become aware and really, understand what's going on, we would fall into the same patterns very easily of what we've been exposed to. So I think that's a key.
You said something really interesting there, and guys, please jump in. But you said something really interesting. You said about being heard, being listened to. And we jokingly had a conversation before we sat down around the table about where we sat as siblings.
Yes.
And I tell you why I find this funny, because in recent years there's been quite a lot of jokes on, if you go onto social media, if you go onto Instagram, about the oldest sibling, the middle sibling, and the youngest sibling. And there's always these sort of dynamics. I am the middle child, and I am an archetypical middle child. And I said to Sarah said, I'm the eldest, and I'm like, yeah, I could tell that a mile off.
You actually guessed.
I did.
You're the eldest.
I said you're the eldest. But there is these dynamics. But the dynamic of the middle child is that the middle child is the one that's not heard, that's a bit crazy, and that goes off and does really bizarre stuff, and so on and so forth. But is that real? Do any of you have an opinion about that? Let's stick with siblings for a second. But because you said about this thing about being heard, we're all very good at communicating, but communication means listening as much as it means speaking. Yes. So is this right about siblings, about Sarah?
Oh my God.
Is there obviously an eldest
I have a
child?
story in mind I'll share later, but
No. You need to share now.
no, it's so true though. Communication. It's like with my sister Hayek, just gonna mention you, but it's so funny. Sometimes she just sends a message where she would have had the whole conversation in her head. And then the message is like, what do you think of something really cryptic? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know? But the truth was, I was exactly the same. And I learned probably through work as well that people are looking at me like, what is she on about? And it's in her head. She's had that whole conversation. But to me, I get one sentence. So I'm like, can you specify what you're talking about? Can you tell me what, you know? And I keep going asking questions like a real pain in the you know, but I'm like, what are you talking about? And my mother's like that, and my sister, and sometimes I'm just like, oh my god. And I was exactly the same. I probably am like that in when I'm, you know, in a hurry. I just write something really cryptic and expect people to know the backstory in my head, and it really comes out with my sister. It's so funny, and that's we get frustrated at each other. She's like, you're serious? You're not understanding what I'm saying? I'm like, no, I'm not.
And that's where the comfort is, within the
Exactly.
family. So it's like you take it for granted more. Like that's kind of, you can
Exactly.
kind of be more, I don't know, unhinged, unpolished.
Exactly. Exactly.
So yeah.
Why is that? That's a really, really good point. Why is that? Because we do tend to be more abrasive, more direct, more unhinged, you know, more just real and brutal with family members than we would be with people we don't know. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
More often than not, yes. I mean, I would say, but then there are people who are unhinged with others as well, outside the family, for sure. I would say definitely.
That's a
Yes.
different episode.
But there's
We could have a whole show for that one.
There's the familiarity with family that allows people to relate in the way that, you know, without needing to make the effort. And I guess that's part of the issue, that sometimes people don't put the energy to make the effort to relate towards someone in a way that is respectful, or to listen to someone. It's like, you know, there's the tendency to brush each other off, or wanting to be heard, but not being ready to listen.
Can I unpick the reason why? I mean, either of you, because you mentioned it originally, Emma. Why? Why do we have familiarity with family members, and I would say to the extent of lack of respect, when you wouldn't do that with your friends?
I mean, I would say it's due to the sort of the safety of the family, although not all families bring safety. So maybe Ingrid can answer this better. But something that I'm very in touch with in my work is you know, you when you told us the theme for today's conversation, I kept thinking like, okay, what's the main thing that I want to communicate? And the main thing is like this disconnection that I feel is so prevalent in society at the moment. You know, we're the loneliest we've ever been, yet we're hyper connected on our devices. And, you know, there's been this shift in society from, you know, the Industrial Revolution, where we started to trade time for money. So we started to work longer, right? It's like you have to be productive, you have to be on it all the time. And then, you know, the introduction of mobiles and laptops and email and internet in general, where you never disconnect. Also, the type of work has shifted, whereas before more of us sort of traded skills for money. Now a lot of us trade thinking for money. So even when you're not at work, you're still thinking about work. And also there's been this, Gabor Mate speaks about peer orientation, which is a theme that has emerged since World War II. Why? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's trauma. He doesn't.
Well, what is that? What are you talking
So
about?
peer orientation is when children are looking to their peers for guidance instead of to their parents. So we are attaching less to our parents than we used to in the past, before World War II. So if you think about it a little bit like, you know, when a duckling hatches from its egg, it will attach to its mum when the mum is nearby. But if the mum isn't nearby, it will attach to whatever is closest. And the same thing is happening with our kids. So, it's beautiful that women work now, and can and have a say and and contribute financially and so on and so forth. At the same time, both parents are working. So who are the kids attaching to? There's less and less time with the children. So the children, they're in daycare or they're in school for longer. There's, one adult for several children. The children are looking to each other for guidance. But the thing is that it's the blind leading the blind, because the children don't have enough life experience to guide each other, nor do they have the unconditional love that a parent has for the child to tolerate the child's bad behavior, because that's a lot about raising kids, right? Raising kids is a lot about receiving
And the
bad
safe
behavior
space.
and disciplining, showing them what's okay, what's not. But again, a child can only receive that guidance with attachment. We don't learn from people we don't feel attached to. And you can only feel attached to somebody who shows you they prioritize you and they're interested in you and they want to play with you and understand your world. So there needs to be time.
Take care and enhance your beauty. Brands, empowering wellness through a selection of high-quality makeup brands.
Natru offers a wide range of 100% plant-based drinks produced from the highest quality water from Monsieur Natural Park and the tastiest whole grain fruits and nuts. All our drinks hold a clean label as they're produced with minimum ingredients, avoiding additives and with no added sugars. Natru, eating better to create a better world.
Durkos, recommended by dermatologists. Anti-hair loss protocol. A concentration of aminexil in a scalp treatment to reduce hair loss by 29%. And in a stimulating shampoo to boost volume by 48%. A potent synergy for hair 3 times stronger. Anti-hair loss protocol. By Durkos, the dermatological scalp and hair expert.
You said that it's a phenomenon since the Second World War, and why? Well, careers, women having careers, is only since the Second World War. Before the Second World War, women may have to work, but they had to work. Rather than
it was a
post-war,
choice,
is a choice to work, and it is a post-war phenomenon. We've talked about
Okay.
it on this show before.
Okay.
That it is well documented. The Second World War changed so many things, but women had to work, and then because the men were at war. So as they came out of the war situation, women were used to having career aspirations. They got their heads around it, and so that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
I have to come straight to Sarah, because Sarah was on the show Women as Working Mums, and you have directly referenced a breakdown or a shift in family relationships that you have to answer. I'm sorry, you're the working mum. Did any of this resonate? Did you hear what Emma was saying, or do you have a different viewpoint?
No. First of all, I read the book and it's really interesting. He has a very, very, very valid point. It's very true, unfortunately. What he says is that they are attaching to friends, like Emma said, rightly so. I really believe that I could be at home all day doing house chores and on my phone in my free time. The connection is still going to be broken.
Exactly.
I could be at work, but when I'm at home, I spend quality time, which is also one of
Yes.
my other values, by the way. Family, quality time. You're going to get to know me inside out before.
And here is the ad for Sarah.
Exactly. Want to know my values? Here they are. And I really believe that's how you connect. Now, I noticed when I'm more connected to my daughter and less And it is when I'm busy and don't have the time. But I really think that if you spend that quality time, doesn't matter how much, but you listen to them, you make them feel heard, which is what Ingrid said. We have to learn how to listen, because sometimes, I mean, my gosh, I had no idea how to listen. I just wanted to talk, to chat, and not even understand what people are saying. And sometimes I'm like that. If I'm upset or stressed, I don't listen. I see it. But if you give that child even if it's 15 minutes, you're building that connection. So it doesn't have to be hours. And I think that is the hope we have to cling on, because otherwise, it's going to be a very sad world. It's very easy to feel disconnected. It's true. Much easier today than it was pre-war, but there are solutions, and I think it's quality time.
You made me think of two things, and I'm going to throw this across to Ingrid as well, because you made me think of two things. You made me think of a session I went to a company, and I hosted this women empowerment event. It was so mind-blowing for me. It was the women in the company sitting around. We did a panel discussion, and the women in the company were sitting in the audience, and it was just a very open discussion, very much like the event. But this woman stood up at the back. She put her hand up. She said, "I wanted to say something." She said, "I'm here with two generations." She was the mother, and her mother was in the company, and her daughter was in the company. And she turned around and she said, "I can tell you from experience, your child will not," because we were talking about working mums. She said, "Your child will not remember the ballet class, and will not remember the art class and the other extracurricular activities. They will remember the time you spent with them when they're in their..."
And how they felt when in your presence. Because obviously, sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's fine.
But even even when, kind of if you're with them, but you're stressed and you're rushed and, you can't connect from that space. So I agree with you that it's the quality over the quantity. At the same time, the quantity does make a difference for that state. Because if we're working all day long, giving our energy to everyone, and then we come home and it's like, okay, now we need to do bedtime and we need to do the quality is different. And I'm not speaking as a mother who's got it all figured out. I'm speaking as a mother who's done this and is realizing this doesn't work, Even I find that my son is so much more cooperative when I've played with him for at least 20 minutes where, there isn't me trying to direct him or kind of achieve some kind of an outcome for the day, kind of okay, we need to brush your teeth now, where he can just kind of play and connect and we can chat.
In fact, if I may say something about, this connection and quality time. I mean, I agree with what you're saying about quality time. It's crucial for the parent-child relationships, for healthy attachments to be fostered.
Yeah.
However, what I feel that there's a lot of alienation, that life has become very fast. There is what is being referred to as intensive parenting. So parents are taken up, want to make sure their child gets into this and that and the other. And the children, poor children, have a schedule from Monday to Sunday, probably. And it's always on the go. And there isn't that moment where they stop and they stay and they connect or they play together. So it's very rushed. There is obviously a lot of pressure to compete, to get, to be up there, to do well in school. But children are being pushed into this, a number of children, I think, the more privileged, probably. However, parents also are alienated. So ironically, we have the means to connect with social media, with our mobiles, with our internet or whatever, these new Twitter and whatnot. But through these means, we are disconnecting.
It's like we're eating fast food when what we need is a slow, home-cooked meal.
A bit of a soup and goes on slowly.
It's
and you
not
cherish
meeting the need.
No. We are not giving children and the families in general, the opportunity to stay together and connect together. And therefore, that's linked to communication difficulties.
Yes.
And not stopping and staying.
But this is really, really poignant that you both mentioned this slow cooked meal. Because I can remember when I grew up, it didn't matter if normally we would eat together every evening. Well, I was English, so we ate at 5:30. I know, really early. But we'd always have Sunday roast together. And you'd have your family and you'd have probably your extended family.
It was a ritual.
It's a ritual, exactly. And you'd sit there and you'd probably, you'd look at your brother or your cousin and you'd be like, and you'd have that kind of, maybe not a positive communication, but you'd have some communication at the table.
Yeah.
But it was there.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that ritual isn't happening.
Yes.
That opportunity to be around each other.
Yes.
And have that slow cooked meal.
Yes.
And that home cooked meal. Because let's face it, when you're in your own home and you're sitting around and somebody's cooking a roast dinner, and I mean, there's obviously the Maltese equivalents, but I'm referring back to my childhood, it takes a long time. Cooking a roast takes about, if you're going to do a good one, I do the best ones. It takes about two. Welcome to come round.
Yes, I was about to say, you invite us now.
I'll
bring the set.
You're all invited. I can vouch. I'm going to say this confidently. My roast potatoes are pretty good. But it takes 2 hours. And that is part of the ritual. It's not going out for dinner. It's not going out and being waited on. It's actually creating something that you're going to enjoy. And I don't see that very often anymore.
Yeah. And that it also gives the opportunity to sit with family members, like you said, who you don't necessarily get along with. You're learning to navigate difficult personalities, where we live in a day and age where we're so used to kind of meeting the short-term goals. So, like even Instagram, I like Instagram a lot, and Instagram has helped me to build my practice. So I'm very grateful for it. At the same time, it's a tool where you connect with people based on shared interests, shared values. So it's like we've gotten used to kind of, and also there's a culture on it of, if they don't speak your language, do away with them kind of thing, be done with them. Which I understand that in some instances you do need to cut a family tie or whatever. But in the majority of instances, you don't. It's actually about learning to navigate, a difficult character. Or actually, it brings a lot of internal growth, learning how to set boundaries, learning how to express yourself when people don't necessarily understand you. It's like we've sort of learned to avoid and to hide behind the phone. Busyness.
But you also said something, my head just went crazy there, and I'm going to ask this as a question, but Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all these, and even WhatsApp or Messenger or text message, it's a sentence.
Yeah.
You're not sitting with someone and saying, we're not doing what we're doing here.
Making eye contact.
Making an eye contact. But you say, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I have a constant communication with a friend of mine at the moment, and I'm checking in with them all the time. They've just lost someone very dear to them. But I'm going to shamefully say that I check in with them. It's easy to tick the box. I checked in. Hey, how you doing today? Yeah, I'm okay. How's life? It's great.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really go much deeper. My grandfather said any conversation worth having should be done face to face and on the telephone at the very least.
And that's a thing that is leading to the disconnection, right? Because our phones also provide entertainment. So we're working a lot as a culture. So we're tired. Then we want a break. So we look at our phones for some kind of break. But in reality, our phones drain us because we go onto these apps where there's all of this social comparison and people trying to sell you stuff all the time. And it's like, it triggers a lot of different emotions because it's very, very fast. But if you're not conscious, you're not aware of what's happening, you're drained, you come back to reality and you have a family to deal with.
And you're giving the devices to the kids as well because you need a break.
There you go. So it's like, this is, the disconnection is something that really needs to be addressed. We need to learn the art of connection.
I think, Ingrid, if you don't mind me saying, you're probably more experienced than any of us at the table. I'm trying to choose my words delicately in this matter because you've seen change. Even in your job, you've seen change. So would you agree that the dynamic now of media and engagement on phones and so on is contributing to the breakdown of relationships and family
I
relationships?
think absolutely, because I mean, I can say, even giving an example in general, not mentioning anyone, but a couple who's having communication difficulties, sometimes I actually have to stop someone from using the phone, and they are actually there to potentially work on the relationship
But
or
not
on
in
an
the
issue.
session. They wouldn't pull out the phone.
There would be maybe someone with a phone in the session, and that keeps sending messages. So it's so much a part of life, and maybe so much a big issue in their relationship, because it's robbing them of quality time, for example, as a couple or as a family. It's like the third person in the room, that, there's got to be a conscious effort, and it's, people aren't always aware about how much of an impact it's actually having. So I would actually ask them, listen, when we're here, we need to have a contract where you need to switch your phone off, or, you need to put it on silent, and as much as possible, don't answer. If someone's on call, is there any way that within this 1 hour you might not be on call, so that you protect the relationship time? Because there is no protection for it. There's no protection of family time or relational time, because of work demands many times, because of life being so fast as a result of all these demands, but also expectations of what people want to achieve that are becoming, they're going beyond what people can cope with many times. And nobody wants to be left out. Nobody wants to feel different. Everyone wants their children to be like other children. So some people end up having to do a lot more work, or they're not able to be around together so that they can earn enough to live a certain lifestyle, which is counterproductive ultimately. So there are all these little things, little and not so little things, that bit by bit are eating away at maybe the kind of connections, or at least the kind of family time we would have had in the past. I mean, it's not to say that eating around the table is always the most pleasant experience. For some families.
I'm so glad someone said it.
For some families, it's like a punishment nearly, being forced to sit at table, and maybe having an authoritarian type of parent is not pleasant at all, for example. But there would have been that experience at least to gauge with, in order to then eventually decide that this is the boundary I want to set, for example. As things are now, sometimes children are put in front of a tablet or some other device while something else is going on, and they miss each other because everybody's busy doing something. Everything is important in its own right. But the time actually to leave devices aside and sit together and ask each other, what was your day like? Or what do you plan to do tomorrow? Or how was school today? How are you feeling? I heard
And something that
simple questions,
something I'd like to build upon that you said, Ingrid mentioned the importance of communication. And with communication comes compassion, like you mentioned, like listening, active listening, and being willing to put yourself in the other person's shoes, whether that's your mother-in-law or your brother or your husband or your child. And the only way to really be compassionate is to be able to go there yourself. And if we're rushed and tired and so on, it's very difficult. It's almost, at times it is physically impossible, because when you're in fight or flight, which comes from being constantly on the go, right? If your brain is working from a fight or flight space, you can't engage your prefrontal cortex. And you need your prefrontal cortex to be engaged to be able to
What does the
have
prefrontal
compassion.
cortex do?
The prefrontal cortex is like the CEO of the brain. It integrates. So it takes information from every single part of the brain and helps you to make sense. This is the epitome of health, the ability to integrate your experiences. And this way of living...
Put this into, because I'm loving listening to you, so I want this in real basic layman's terms. The prefrontal cortex is the bit that kind of tempers and controls everything else and makes everything work together. Is that right?
So long as it
I wouldn't say it makes everything work together. I'd say it integrates. So it takes information from all of the other parts of the brain. And if it's receiving enough oxygen and blood flow, essentially, meaning that the body is regulated, so it's not in a state of fight or flight. So
It's not in panic. It's not not
Exactly.
anxious. It's not. It's relaxed and it's
it has
coping.
guidance. So you are interacting with somebody who helps you to make sense of your experiences, right? So for example, a traumatized brain cannot do this. So a traumatized brain would need healing to be able to get to this stage. Then the brain can integrate its experiences. And this is the epitome of health, because it's like you can make sense of the world around you and you can make sense of yourself in relation to it. Doesn't mean you become a perfect human being, because you're constantly adding on information every hour of every day, and you're taking in conflicting information. And with these phones, you're getting a lot of different messages at a lot of time, in a short amount of time. So the importance of integration it's just super important. It's just super important.
I kind of want to bring that into a thought that I just had. I had an experience just very, very recently, and you guys are all mums and I'm not. And so I'm going to say massive respect. I had a new vision on a mum experience the past weekend. My best friend has had a baby 2 years ago. He's gorgeous, he's lovely, he's cheerful and he's wonderful, but he's now a 2-year-old. And I haven't seen her for a long time. And her husband and me and my husband, we decided to have brunch together on a Sunday morning. We went down to the beach, we had a swim, we went to this kind of little beach bar, and all he wanted to do was eat ice cream, donuts, and run around and see what everybody else is doing on the tables. Now, she and her husband had made a decision not to put tablets in front, not to do that. Yeah. All right, that's not something that they were going to do. But what it meant was that he had to be monitored all of the time. And I haven't seen her for a while. And we just wanted to have this conversation. But it was almost like she was going into, or they as a couple were going into that kind of very hyper state to make sure, because he's near the beach, right? She wants to keep an eye on him. He's not going to go down into the water. He needs to be safe, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And there was this lovely group of ladies there, and he's like a cheeky little fella, and he was dancing to the music, and the girls and at one point all the girls are crowded around him, so my friend can't see him anymore, but she wants to give him the freedom to engage with other adults, but to do it in a safe way, and so on and so forth. And suddenly I'm sitting there going, good grief, that is really hard work. Yeah. I mean, it is on the go every single minute. I did not have a quality conversation with her because it wasn't going to happen. Yeah. In actual fact, the only time we got the opportunity to have a quality conversation is when we went to the car, put him in the car seat, put the AC on, and he fell asleep.
Finally.
The husbands are still in the bar having a beer. And I was like, oh,
you
fantastic.
Could see your friend.
No, I'm like, tell me, really, how is it? Because good grief. And it comes down to that sort of, that high state and respect to mums, all mums. Because I always thought it was laziness to put that in front of a child, put this in front of the child and the child will be amused and we can actually have an adult conversation. And I am not for 1 second now ever going to judge a parent that does that, because whilst I would love to say that if I was in that situation, I would entertain my child and I'd never want to do that. But good grief, it's really hard work, isn't it, parenting? Parenting is really, really, really hard work. But that comes back to that constant state that you're talking about.
The fight or flight.
Always being alert, always looking to see what's going on.
It can be stressful, especially when, you have older kids than me. My son is 3, so you tell me how it goes after. But yes, I can tell you how it goes later. Yes, but those first few years, they have they don't regulate themselves. They don't have a prefrontal cortex yet, so you
still
have
underdeveloped. It hasn't developed yet.
As the parent, you need to be the prefrontal cortex. So you need to, a kid has no idea how to regulate their emotions. If they're angry, if they're sad, they don't know what to do. So you literally have to mirror it to them. You have to show them how to do it. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of regulating yourself to be able to regulate with your kid, and teach them how to regulate.
Lived experience.
Yes, I mean, this is why I start to think. I think my daughters taught me more how to be a woman than, when I became a mom, because you have to self-regulate. You have to do everything. So it's a great teaching experience, really.
So let's move away just from being a mum, right, for the moment. Let's move into the sphere of larger families, because this is the navigating family relationships. Does that self-regulation, does that experience mean that you are able to manage family relationships better?
Good question. I think I had a lot of empathy for my mom when I became a mom. I really understood her and saw her so much better than, as opposed to seeing her just as a daughter who would say, "Oh, mom, but you should have done this." And I just realized, wow, she's done such a good job. She did. So I think that really, really helps. And including my dad as well, obviously, because when you become a parent, you then just really empathize with your parents. So yes, it did. It helped me. And then there are things, like we said in the beginning, for me, that's the space I'm in probably. And then there are things that I say, okay, I'd like to do something slightly different to what my parents did in this situation. If it's possible, doesn't mean I'm going to succeed, but I'm aware of it, So I think it gave me an amazing perspective. In reality, I could never really understand till I became, probably till I just passed with myself. Being a mom, what it's like, and navigating the families, the marriage with children.
Yes.
I
That's
would never.
where the self-regulation makes a big difference within the marriage. For example, if you take it to other relationships, right? So like you were saying, kind of communication. I cannot take in my partner's perspective if I am being triggered and I don't know how to see my trigger, understand where it comes from, and regulate myself. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine once told me that we are all covered with invisible buttons.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
yes.
don't know that they're there. And at
Exactly.
any point, someone might press them and they don't know that they're there. And we didn't know that they were there. And suddenly you have this
Yes.
huge dynamic.
Response.
Ingrid, is this one of the most significant issues within families, that we are all covered in these invisible buttons?
Not everybody's aware, of course. And I think people who usually go to therapy have the opportunity to start becoming aware of, triggers. Triggers are things that make a person react, and sometimes they don't know why they get so upset or so angry,
Yeah.
to put it in layman terms, why they are reacting in a certain way, why they are so angry at something, So something would have made them react so strongly, so intensely. I think managing, what helps managing families. I mean, it's not just women and becoming mothers. That's important. Not all women become mothers, but I think women don't exist in isolation. They're embedded within a system, within a family system, within a heterosexual relationship. If they are living with a partner or married and they have children, a lot depends on the quality of that relationship before everything else.
Yeah.
Before, functioning as parents, the way that the adults in the family interact, the way they manage their conflicts is going to impact directly and indirectly the way the family operates.
100%.
And how the children react. So it connects to emotional regulation that Emma was mentioning, and parents. If a parent is not emotionally regulated, if a parent is unable to manage their own strong emotions for whichever reason, if one of them has a partner, let's say the woman has a partner who is criticizing her all the time. So she's reacting to the criticism, and then she has a child that is acting out. And not all children are the same, as we know. Some children are more challenging than others for different reasons. So this emotional regulation doesn't happen just between the mother and the child. It's a whole system that holds it together. And primarily that the couple or the adults, the caring adults within that family. Now, you can have an adult parenting alone if there is a parent, but it's all interrelated, and it's always simultaneously being impacted by what is going on at that time. So it's important to see the whole picture and to see the moment in time as well, because it could be somebody's going through a tough time. So who are we to judge that this person is not capable of managing their child or their children? What's going on, for example.
Whether for a moment of disconnection, a complete body-mind reset, or a bonding time together, book online stress-free at myoka.com. Complimentary spa facilities on every visit.
Touching on that, bringing this, you said about this regulation. We're using this term about emotional regulation, and I think and particularly in the context of communication, because of course, and I want to draw a parallel and a kind of a story relating to that. My older brother, I'm the middle child. My older brother, ever since I have been born, he's always said, "But you're the adopted one." Oh, yes. Well, both my brothers have dark brown eyes, and I'm the one with blue eyes. And it was and I have two brothers. And it was the tease. It was like, you've been adopted. You're the adopted one. We don't know where you came from and all that. And ever since I was a small child. And there's emotion associated with that. There has always been emotion associated with that.
Your emotion or their emotion? Which one are you talking about?
Probably both, because it probably for him, we've never had the opportunity to sit down and talk about it. Probably for him, it comes from a place. It was only in my more recent years I actually had the opportunity to say, can you stop saying that? And my younger brother turned around and said, can you just stop saying that? Emotional regulation was that sometimes I would come away and I would be like, geez, I would be devastated by it. But I didn't have the guts to say anything to him. And we in family dynamics, I'm not a parent, so we're not, in this point, we're not talking necessarily about parent-children relationships, but we can say it comes back to that idea of being a little bit too familiar. We can say some bloody awful things to each other.
Yes.
In that context. So if that is the case, in family relationships, how do we regulate our emotional response to that in a positive way for us, first of all, and then within the relationship? Because that's going to happen. You're always going to have some dumbass brother who says you're adopted, right?
I mean, you just set a very healthy boundary there with your brother when you told him, just don't say that anymore. And I think that's how you regulate your emotions. I mean, at least from my perspective.
It took me 40 years to get there. So I'm just wondering whether for everyone else they can get there a little bit faster than 40 years.
Listen, I have many buttons.
We all do.
And but I'm really learning how to start speaking up for myself and setting boundaries that make me happy and happier to interact with my family. Because if I know they can take that extra step that irritates me, I just say, okay, now let's just stop there, because it's not going to do anything for our relationship.
In a way, you're talking about self-respect as well. Sort of when you identify sort of the boundary that you need to set in order to feel respected, especially, they could be joking around this thing about you being adopted, or you don't look like us, you're someone else's child, or at some point taking a stand and wanting to respect yourself is setting a boundary. But then, of course, it could take a while to get there. It doesn't happen overnight.
It could take 40 years.
Exactly.
But is this... We've kind of moved on from self-regulation or regulating your emotion to boundaries. I'm assuming this is all part of the same thing.
Yes, I mean, because emotional regulation, it's, you know, kind of noticing the emotion. It's not about always being calm. It's about, you know, acknowledging the emotion that you're experiencing. Because if you think about emotions, they're like an internal compass, right? So they give you information about yourself and the environment and help you to navigate it, so long as you're not reactive. So if I experience anger and I just blow up, it just wrecks the situation. But if I can acknowledge I'm experiencing anger, maybe I decide to, okay, I'm going to process this and then I'm going to come back with a response, you know, and I ask myself, okay, what's really bugging me about what this person is doing? You know, okay, it made me feel left out. It made me feel like I didn't belong. It's, you know, it makes me feel like, you know, they have more of an esteemed space in the family than me, you know, and then this has stayed with me. Okay, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? And that's action.
So, okay, let me come back to you on this, because this is a really good point. And I think I'm going to ask everyone at the table to comment on this.
Yeah.
That process that you just described very calmly and very logically is brilliant in a calm and logical situation.
No.
But our siblings or our parents or our cousin
Trigger
or our
us.
other family members are going to be pressing that button. And sometimes they press it knowing that it's there. You're adopted.
Of course. And also you'll be in the family system, means there's all the history there. And it's like you're not always, you know, calm.
So how do we get to the point? Because this comes down to communication, regulating our emotions and setting boundaries. How do we get to the point where we can respond in that calm way that you just described and say, okay, what button was he just pressing? All right, let's just take a moment to...
Okay.
Because I can tell you... Because I tend to be... Exactly, I'm like, whoa!
No, I think
and we all go from 0 to 100.
Exactly, that's
your
the trigger.
question is gold. I don't think it's about being perfect. Like, I'm Ingrid, you tell us your perspective. I don't think it's about being perfect and kind of like always being calm and always being zen. Like, no, you know, like I mess up a lot, like with my husband, with my mom, with my sister. But what I have definitely learned to do, and with years of practice and therapy and so on and so forth, is I can notice myself in a pattern now. I can notice when I'm reacting from a trigger, and I can own it, and I can say like, okay, I need to like take time, and then I will understand it. I'll do my processing, and then I'll come back and I'll say, look, I see what I did. I'm sorry. You know, I see what I did, or I won't do it again, or whatever is relevant at that moment, and I will say, you know, whatever, either what affected me, and I will also have compassion at that point. I will bring in compassion. I understand where you were coming from. I understand that probably you weren't trying to do it, or I see that you were trying to do it, and at the same time, you know, I reacted, but I'll bring some realness. So it's not about always being zen. It's about the ability to process and come back with something real when the other member is able to go there with you, because there are some family members who just cannot.
I think what you're mentioning takes a lot of maturity and self-awareness to come to the point of being able to acknowledge one's feelings and acknowledging and validating the other's feelings, and talking about you know, how it made me feel, and saying sorry. So that's the ideal.
Yes.
But I think in reality it doesn't happen so much. However, emotional regulation, sort of helping children to calm their, you know, their nervous system down, to, you know, if they are really upset about something, getting a parent that gets more upset than them is doing the opposite.
Exactly.
it does not help the child to regulate, to learn how to calm themselves down, for example, or, if they're really upset about something and they're crying, and then the parent starts getting angry because the child is crying, they are not helping that child. Whereas if a parent or another adult is able to, try to understand what the child is upset about, and to try to soothe the child by, some softer, gentle words, and help them to calm down gently, that child by time learns how to regulate their own emotions as they grow. So that is the emotional regulation. Now, Emma mentioned reactive, how some people are reactive. There are personalities that are very reactive. They are very quick to respond. They are very fiery. There are children that are more reactive than others temperamentally. Neurologically, they are also different. And they provide big challenges to their parents, because sometimes the parents, with all good intention, feel triggered and challenged by their child. Because their child will not sit in the blessed car seat. Their child does not want to stay in the high chair to eat. Their child will scream. Their child will
wants
wake
daddy
up.
over mommy, for example.
There are things that happen. And sometimes imagine parents who are tired, who want to get everything sorted by the evening so that maybe they get an hour together, quality time, and this child will not sit still, or they need to get somewhere on time, and the child will not cooperate with them. Now, sometimes the expectation to cooperate is not realistic, but the way parents then respond to this sometimes can start to trigger conflict between the parents, which begins to happen in front of the child. That only makes things worse. So the dynamic that starts to be created is a family dynamic around the child that begins to be played out from one situation to another. Whereas really the focus, and if one were to make an intervention, one would need to intervene on the family, on the couple, to help them understand what's going on. But there's got to be the opportunity for that. No, not everybody has the space or the mindfulness, unless they are supported, to actually reflect about it, to actually realize. I remember, if I can mention, when I was doing my PhD, most of my work was with couples who had babies that were highly reactive. They were all, they all filled in a measure. So I eventually ended up with a sample of couples who had this 8 month to 1 year old child that was scored as highly reactive based on the parents' descriptions of the child. And most of these parents were very stressed. There was a level of distress, there was conflict happening in front of the child that only made things worse for the child. When parents then were given the chance to focus on the quality of the relationship, the way they were supporting each other, the way they were undermining each other sometimes, talking about their challenges, talking about the relationship, they began to work together better. They began to support each other more. They began to have dates together. And the relationships began to improve. And the level of the stress began to decrease. Their children, despite being neurologically diverse, because they are wired up, there are children who are easygoing, that are reactive, and there are others that are slower to get used to adults, maybe. Despite them being neurologically different, sort of reactive babies, they began to calm down. And my question was, are they calming down because they are getting older by time? Because there was a 16-week intervention every week would meet. And it could have been, but there was another group of parents who did not get the same intervention, and they had exact same type of children. Their babies didn't calm down, and the parents' distress levels increased to the point that within a year, some of those parents had already separated. So, I mean, this was scientifically measured.
Which all comes back to full circle to where we started about communication.
Yes. And listening to each other and being compassionate to each other, all that, yes.
Which applies not just to, and you use this beautiful example of parents and children, but it applies to, as we've discussed, all family members throughout the family. So I'm sort of heading towards some synopsis of what we've discussed here. We've talked about communication being the key issue. Good communication is beneficial to relationships. Bad communication, I know it sounds really, really obvious, but bad communications is disruptive to relationships. No matter which, whether it's a parent, child, whether it's a sibling, whether it's an uncle and aunt, whether it's adult parents. I would just like to touch on that for a second. You talked about therapy and so on, but just for a second, because we're going to talk about buttons and boundaries in a second. Good communication, just for anyone that's listening or watching, some top tips for good communication. Because there are, aren't they? I mean, don't try and communicate with each other when there's a screaming child in the room, or your mum's on the phone and screaming down the phone and saying, how do you nurture with your family members good communication? When is the best time to talk to your family members?
I was going to say, I'll tell you when I shouldn't.
Well, tell me when you shouldn't.
When I'm triggered, I want to, because I'm triggered, I want to speak, but it's the worst time to speak. And it's always good to take a break. But this is it, right? It's not easy as an adult, and it takes a lot of self-reflection. And I think if we had to put a percentage, like Ingrid was saying, there are many people that perhaps don't self-reflect as much as you guys do, because this is also your job. Trudy, you tend to self-reflect because it's your nature, but it's not easy. So I think, I'd love to hear tips of, the communication when you're calm, that's great. But what do you do when you're triggered? And what do you do as an adult, maybe? So this is my question.
You and me, we're sitting here asking these ladies for some free advice.
Exactly, because now I'm no longer a child, so I kind of need to, read.
So some communication pointers to work with family relationships. We'll come to boundaries and buttons in a second, but just let's go with communication for the time being. When is the best time to communicate? When is the worst time to communicate? And any tips that you can pass on?
Maybe what's conducive to effective communication that is, that's positive in some way, that is helpful. I think there's got to be time set for it.
Okay.
If somebody's rushed doing something and I can't be attentive to you, it's not the right time to communicate. Maybe we could say, listen, when you come home later on, we need to talk about this. Sort of you're setting the space
time for it.
We set time for it, and there's an expectation that there's going to be time to talk, because there isn't time right now. So if we are rushed, there is definitely not the right time to communicate. But then, of course, it depends about what we're communicating. It means if it means, listen, you need to pick up the children today, I need to tell you in time, and also that we are not as Sarah mentioned, we're not triggered. We're not upset and angry at that time, because we could end up saying things that are hurtful. And maybe today we might forget something, but sometimes things are so hurtful that even though we might say sorry, they would still have nipped a little bit of away at the core.
I was going to say, just before you go, and just in a second, but you mentioned, as you were saying that, I thought to myself, you're talking about this quality time, but setting a time aside. And I think I watched something, it was a TED talk or something like this, and it was coming back to devices. And a guy was sitting on the stage holding a phone, and he was asking, I'm giving this talk and I'm holding a phone. What is your perception of me right now? And if you want to have that quality conversation, I always say this because when I met my husband, I said, whenever we go out for dinner, phones are banned. They're not allowed on the table. And he was like, you crazy lady. And I'm like, no, I want to know that this is the most important conversation. that we're having right now,
Yeah.
and that is not relevant. You can pick up your message later.
Yeah.
You can look at TikTok later. You can do all of that later. Even when I go to the toilet, I don't want to come back from the toilet and you're on your phone, because I'm sorry, all that says is that you can't wait to be on the phone.
Yeah.
And these are the messages that we are giving each other when we put the phone, even if you put it face down on the table, it's still in the room.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I feel very sorry, I feel quite strongly about that.
Just to go back to communication. So whenever you're in an intimate relationship, it's going to bring up your childhood wounds, right? Your past stuff, like your wiring, so to speak.
Okay.
You're going to trigger things in each other because you're interacting a lot and it's intimate. They're like your significant partner, so it's going to bring stuff up for you. So when it comes to communication, what's super important, in addition to having the time and all of these good tips, is understanding yourself. So, like, for example, my husband and I, when we got together, when we first met, we triggered each other so much to the point that I wondered, like, is this relationship like good for us? Because we argued so much and I felt really like misunderstood by him, and I think he felt misunderstood by me. So after 1 year of being together, we were like, okay, like, I'm doing therapy, you do therapy, we'll do therapy together when we need it. Like, we need to go on this journey and see if we're a good fit or not. Because I wondered, are we incompatible? And it was only through understanding myself that I could communicate to him what was going on within me, what I was upset about, what I needed and why. And ditto, like, same from his end. And also, it's when you have compassion for yourself and your triggers and your wounds that you can gain that emotional capacity, that compassionate capacity to have for someone else, to be able to understand their story. And that's vital for relationships. Like, you know, today, my husband and I, like, we were in the car, he dropped me off. We had spent the whole morning doing things for our son and we were about to go off and do work. And we were in the car, and my husband has a very different way of relating to me. He's like, you know, 10 minutes is good. Like, we checked in, we're good. Like, you know, kind of, we're done. Like, I'm different. My love language is quality time. Like, you know, like, let's lengthen this so that we can not only get to the core of the issue, but also find solutions, and let's slow cooked meal, basically. And he was like, he just wanted to kind of like, you know, I love you, kind of thing. And like, obviously, like, I know he loves me. And at the same time, there are things that, you know, will irritate me sometimes, you know. So it's like, what's my point? My point is, relationships are not about doing them perfectly. Like, you know, like, even your therapist has like difficult situations in their relationship, you know. It's not like you ever get to a point where you're always zen, you're always calm, you know. Like, today I basically got out of the car in a bit of a huff, like, you know, and I didn't make eye contact before I left. I was
see that Emma gets into a house.
Do you know what I'm saying? We're all sitting at the table saying, thank goodness Emma gets in a huff.
I got out like in a huff, like, kind of like tibseta, like, kind of, now he wants to talk about it, like, you know. And then later he messaged and he told me, I know you're going on a podcast today, like, I didn't want to ruin your mood. And I was like, it's fine. I told him, I didn't mean to F you off. I said, what did I say? I said, I can't do this 10-minute thing. Like, I said, I need more time, you know, I need to be able to, like, get into the issue and then find a solution. We just need more time. And he got it. But he got it because we've been doing this work. My husband and I have been together for almost 13 years. We've been doing this work for 12 years. We still do relationship courses. We've gotten to the point where we've taught about breaking up, you know, twice. So, you know, we still learn and do the inner work. It's
something about the way you bounce. shakes me up and makes me get down on my.
But it's interesting, and it's something we haven't even touched on, because this thing about families, with all due respect, I threw my script out about an hour ago, because we've just sat here and talked about things that are issues. We're going to come to those triggers in a second, but sticking with that whole idea of communication, I think it's worth remembering and being kind to ourselves to remind ourselves that within family dynamics, you have men and women. And you just highlighted one very crucial point. Men do not think and communicate the same way as women. And generationally, my mum does not communicate and relate the same way that I do. And my children's age wouldn't communicate the same way. So we've got, like, in the middle of this, everybody trying to navigate, avoid triggers, set boundaries, communicate, make time for each other. You've just highlighted one point, is that we all communicate differently as well.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, it's really good to hear that Emma effed off her husband and had a huff, because actually that's very validating. It's what human beings do.
Yes.
We F each other off.
Yes. I mean, we're triggered. I mean, I don't know how many times I've interacted with my sister and I've thought, what a bitch, But then if I step into a space of compassion and think about, her point of view, I can understand, At the same time, it doesn't mean that I drop my point and let, somebody walk all over. So it's a whole.
Well, see, you've just
dynamic.
done that whole thing of you talked about communication, then you talked about triggers, and then you talked about boundaries.
Yes.
And it does seem like that is a three elements within family relationships that are, I never thought about this before, are so connected.
Yes.
You can't take them away from each other.
You can't have a relationship without boundaries. Like you said, there are no
They are always
relationships
interacting with
But
each
you
other.
also can't have a relationship without triggers. And triggers mean that you have to set boundaries, whether you set that yourself for yourself not to get triggered. And that comes back to being well aware of those invisible buttons. Isn't it? It's a question, I guess, but isn't it? We've all had that experience where siblings, like my brother saying, I'm adopted, where your sibling knows you, they're growing up with you, they know well enough where that invisible button is, and they just go, boop,
Yes.
boop.
Yes.
But they know exactly what they're doing.
Where your spouse's invisible button is. No?
No, he's perfect.
I know where mine is.
I'm perfect too. But they do. Because we have that relationship that has, because I would say that within intimate relationships, there are probably sometimes more levels of, how can I put, maybe not respect is the right thing, but how can I put it? You might say something to a sibling that you wouldn't even say to your intimate partner, because you know that your sibling is going to, you're stuck with them. They're there. So you can press their button and you just keep going. And isn't it true? Don't we do that with our families, with parents, with brothers, with sisters, with children, with aunts, uncles, grandparents, whatever? If we are in the mood that we need to gratify the bad mood that we're in because we're having a huff and we're effed off, we might just go and press someone's button just for the sheer hell of it. I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Sometimes
you're
people just avoid. Sometimes
true.
people just withdraw because they don't have a voice in their family.
Yeah.
So it's a guess on what actually they are going through or what they're feeling, and nobody knows really. They either feel that they're not seen at all or that they're transparent. So I don't think every family would be the same. I mean, and I don't necessarily always think that we are part of communication is necessarily the triggers. They can be, but not always. I mean, I think you mentioned a good example about the mobile not being at the table. That's one way of setting a boundary and protecting the space for good communication to happen, for quality time to happen. So protecting space, setting a time for it, listening, being open to listening to each other, and being attentive. These are all qualities that can foster better communication, rather than something that's rushed or something that is triggered by anger or by another emotion. I recall quite a long time ago, I mean, when we think about how people communicate differently, I mean, people communicate different things as well. And I remember there was this family once where they had lost a child very, very suddenly. And I had the role of meeting with them. And they were all reacting very differently to the situation, with two family members that were rather numb. One could understand with the reaction, with shock and all this. It must have been about 2 months since this incident happened. A sibling that was tearful and the mother that was inconsolable. And they were all in the same room together. And what was happening in the dynamic of this particular family in a context of grief and a very difficult loss was that they were blaming each other. The mother was blaming, for example, the other parent and one of the children, that they had no feelings because they were not crying. Because crying for her meant that they were communicating their sorrow of the loss. And another person in the family was annoyed with the mother, who was obsessing about preserving the room of this child that passed away. So they were annoyed with her way of trying to communicate her grief. But what actually eventually helped this family to connect in all this, in the intense pain that they were going through, was understanding that they had a different way of dealing with grief, of communicating their grief. Some doing it more, outwardly, some needing to withdraw, some needing to take out all the belongings, and some needing to hide everything. So rather than looking at it as negative or positive, what was useful, and this can apply to other forms of communication, is appreciating difference. And that difference is not necessarily bad, it's just different, as long as it's not harmful in that
And
sense.
comes back to the compassion that Emma was talking about, and that empathy. So we're talking about communication. Communication between families is absolutely vital. It's critical. It has to be given space. It has to be given respect. It has to be given time. If you want to, and we're talking about not even if there's if there's an issue that you need to talk about. If you want to have a good family relationship, a positive family relationship with any family member, you have to give them space. You have to communicate with them. It could be that you're talking about something that's completely irrelevant and not particularly important, but you have to have that attention, that space. You have to have compassion and understand that each family member reacts to and acts within a situation differently. We also, I'm going to ask you guys for sort of a synopsis of this trigger situation. How do we avoid being triggered, and how do we stop ourselves from triggering other family members? Because we've got those three components that we've talked about: the triggers, the communication, and the boundaries. And we'll close the boundaries in just a second. But any words of advice for somebody who finds themselves being triggered? We quite often are not as self-aware as, as we said, we're not as self-aware as maybe you ladies, because this is what you do.
Yes, that's
it's taken me a very long time to understand my triggers and why they are there. And they normally have a long history that's, as old as I am. So how do we deal with triggers? How do we identify and deal with triggers?
get a coach, as in get somebody to teach you how to do it. Is my, I mean, okay, some people will resist that answer because they'll say I'm busy and it costs money and it's time. But I think that ultimately you're either playing the short-term game or you're playing the long-term game, right? And if you're playing long-term, then you want to invest your money and your energy into the things that matter most. And the quality of your life equals the quality of your relationships. So, in my opinion, and you feel free to disagree with me, put your money into the areas that are going to pay off the most, which is your relationships. Learn to understand yourself. Learn how to communicate. Learn how to understand your triggers, you know? That's what I say. Learn it from somebody who knows how to do it, who's learned how to do it themselves.
No, if that's the answer, invest in any which way that you need to. That is a very good answer.
What about people who can't invest and who are not aware that they can invest, you know, and that maybe do not understand that something is a trigger, that they don't maybe necessarily understand why is it that I get so upset about this, that I always get upset about this. Maybe somebody else can alert them to, you know, you always react this way when we talk about this, for example. Sometimes the family around them can, or colleagues can. So it's not always so simple to address the triggers, because many times I would say triggers are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Emma, as well, they're usually addressed within a therapeutic context, that a person, for example, tries to understand what it is that is eliciting a certain emotion, and that if there is a certain pattern in this type of emotion, if it happens at a certain time or with certain type of people, and then how does it connect with life experiences? And more often than not, it does. More often than not, it might connect with a particular incident that was particularly significant. But for someone to get there, there needs to be that journey.
Awareness. They need to know what they don't know.
But through a journey, through a
Yes.
therapeutic journey, more often than not.
Yes, but the people we're talking to who are listening to the
Yes,
podcast
yes.
now have this awareness.
Yes,
So now they perhaps they know what they don't know, or they know what they know. It depends where they are on their journey.
Yes, they can ask that question of like, when do I usually mostly feel this way? With what type of people, with whom, in which setting?
I have a friend, Fiona, who said to me, I must have only been about 3 or 4 years ago, she made this very simple statement that made a huge change for me. She said, we are all covered in invisible buttons. Nobody escapes that. We all have buttons.
Yes.
And I think once we realize that and accept that and say, you know, that is life, that we all have. You have, Ingrid, you have, Sarah, you have. We all have invisible buttons. Some big, some small. I like to think of it, you know, that stuff that you pop, the bubble wrap?
Yes.
I always think that we have bubble wrap, you know, big, great big bubble wrap. And somebody might push it and you pop it and you didn't even know it was there. It's an invisible button. And I think once we appreciate that and accept that, then you kind of stop trying to avoid it.
Yeah.
And you say, you know what, it's okay. I've got a button. That's my button. I have it. I know I have to deal with it. I'm not unique. I'm not different. I'm not exceptional. I'm not, you know, deficit in any way, shape or form. Everyone's got a button or two. And that then when you get to that point, whether you can accept a colleague or a friend or a family member, maybe not a family member, but, you know, sometimes that comes with its own trauma, or whether you decide to go to therapy to deal with that button because that button's actually really big and you can't deal with it yourself. I think that's acceptance of the fact that we are all there. Would you not agree? We all have buttons, even if they're just tiny ones.
Totally. I mean, I think exactly that. We have so many triggers. I think it would be good to define maybe what a trigger is for someone. For me, it would be something where the reaction is so automatic that I can't stop myself. Before it happens, before I'm even aware, because I'm so triggered. And it's like something goes over me and you just say something because and when those are big triggers, so that's for me as well something that you say, okay, this has upset me very much, this is something I need to look into. But I really think it's good that we tell people, listen, it's important to be aware. What the worry in inverted commas, or are the people who are not aware, who just think it's their character, or when not that self-aware, because believe it or not, self-awareness isn't that common.
No.
And I come across a lot of people who have no,
Of course.
self-reflection, no self-awareness, and it's probably a little sad, because you say, if only they had the time to look into it. I'm very motivated because I think I have a really funny way of saying it, but you're born one way, you're born into a family, you don't choose your family. And it is our job as individuals to be the best version of ourselves. But it is up to us to do it. Not our parents, not our siblings, not our partner. It is up to us to come in and understand what our triggers are. But that is me and how I view my self-awareness journey, which, please note, hasn't happened. It has happened very recently because it hasn't been happening for long or anything.
But just by saying it's up to me, also not only gives you responsibility, but it gives you power. It's up to me. I can overcome everything that the world has ever thrown at me. I can. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be darn hard. I can navigate past every trigger or button. I'm triggers is very aggressive, isn't it? It's a very aggressive term. I'm triggered. We use it very much as a sort of, I'm triggered and that's me, I'm triggered.
Yeah.
And that's why I prefer this kind of button thing. It's a little tiny bit softer. But we all come into this world, as you said, and we are circumstantially changed, and we develop a whole bunch of things that we carry with us. But what you were saying just then, which I really love, is that not only are we responsible, we have the power to make that change. We do. There's not one single person that doesn't have the ability to change their outlook and themselves. They might not change their circumstances, but they can change themselves. I want to stick with you for a second, because I want to close with this just definition of boundaries. We could do this all again, couldn't we? Because I think there's so many things we haven't talked about, but we've certainly laid some really good groundwork. And I want to just stick with you on this thing of boundaries, and then ask these ladies to sort of wrap up boundaries. You yourself, you said that you've been able to implement boundaries. What does that look like?
I think rather than what it looks like, how does it feels really good. It feels like probably what Ingrid said, self-respect. This is my limitation. I'm going to give you a good version of myself. But the minute you pass that limit, I can't give you the best version. So I do that in order to protect the relationship as well.
Yes.
Because I want to protect the relationship with my sibling, with my mother, with my father, with my mother-in-law. I want to protect it. So, and as you said, maybe I'm the type of person who would say things as they are. So now I say, this is how much I can take. I can't do more. And it's something simple as, if I'm really tight for example, for time, or really tired, before I would make the extra effort to go, but I would be not happy to be there and exhausted. Now I would say, this weekend is not good for me. Let's do it another weekend. One, I give them a better version of myself. And I'm not shy to say, I need time to rest. And this weekend is not good. And I've just done it recently. I said, look, this month is just crazy. I cannot put in another lunch or date. I cannot. And it's just how it is. If they wanted to meet me, well and good. If they didn't like it, I think they were respectful. They understood, but that was my boundary.
That's really powerful. How many of us go through life not doing that? Not saying no when we really need to, and for the greater good.
Yeah.
Good on you, girlfriend. Cheers to that.
Thank you.
I liked what you just said. Sorry,
I was hoping we would cheers.
Oh, no, absolutely. Chin, chin.
Cheers.
Cheers to Sarah. Let's talk about boundaries for a second. Do either of you ladies have anything to add to this boundaries? Yeah, go.
I think picking on what Sarah said, you're talking about limits. So setting a limit, this is my limit, and this is how much I will allow you to enter into my space as well, because it's a two-way thing. And how many times that when we don't set enough limits and we sacrifice our well-being for the good of others, so that others don't get upset, so that we don't let others down. So, but then ultimately we are letting ourselves down. So it's in a way finding a balance. It doesn't mean we can never, we never make the effort, but that we find a balance, that we feel we've respected ourselves too. And if we're not up to something, or if we are entering into a toxic environment, and we decide, this is not a good environment for me and for my children or for anyone, then it means saying no to certain things. So that's also setting a boundary.
I loved what Sarah said though as well. She said, if I was to turn up when I really can't turn up, you're not going to get the best version of me. And that would be detrimental to a family relationship anyway. So sometimes it's better not to turn up.
Yes.
And I used to do that. I used to turn up to make them happy. With a little bit of self-betrayal. And now it's great, because I said, I can't do September, but let's have a lovely lunch in October. And everybody seemed to be happy. I mean, it's a simple example, but it's really worked for my mental health, my happiness, my relationship with them. I think that has been crucial and life-changing, really, in relationships.
And in a way, you're setting a model even for your own children, for your own family,
I
by
hope
doing
so.
No, I think that they summed it up really, really well, like in terms of what setting a boundary is. So, yeah.
I'm going to stick with that theme of boundaries, and I want to wrap up this really cool show by asking you guys to close with a piece of advice. And I'm going to put my lesson learned is that there was a Sicilian phrase that I have adopted in relation to my families. I have a slightly different relationship with my family because my family are abroad. So when I go to see my family, I go to see them for a duration, but it might be 6 months, 9 months before I see them again, parents included. But I picked up on this. Somebody once said this to me, and I don't know if I've quite got the phrase right, but it certainly works. That families are like, a Sicilian phrase, families are like fish. They go off after 72 hours, after 3 days. And I have found that there is a 72-hour formula. When I go and spend time with my family, after 72 hours, that is our limit. And a recent visit to my family, I had 72 hours with my parents. We needed to go into the city. My husband and I, we took the opportunity to go into the city after 72 hours, have 24 hours break, come back, and with the rest of the time, we were there for another 48 hours. But that 72 hours is like clockwork, because after 72 hours, you've grown too familiar, that novelty is worn off, and actually you're just starting to annoy each other again.
The old patterns come back.
Exactly. You get just a little bit too comfortable, and there's this, and this, and this. So you go away, and then you can come back, and you can enjoy it again. And for me, it's worked like that for 10 years. I've lived by it. And as soon as I did it, my relationships with my family totally changed. So that's my little thing. Do you have anything apart from that boundary setting? Have you got any other little word of advice for anybody in a family situation?
I'm definitely taking your 72-hour. I love it. Love it.
Girlfriend.
What I would say, and if my parents ever hear this, I think that it really helps when you know that your parents did the best that they could with what they knew and with what they had. Yeah. And I just, whenever I find myself like, getting triggered by whatever someone's going to say, my parents, my mom or I just think that, and I just say, you know what, and I have loads of compassion then. So I turn from triggered and irritated to compassionate. And that has helped me a lot. For the siblings, I don't have anything yet.
They're not forgivable.
I'll come in the next one. I have to learn.
Specifically about siblings, okay.
Okay, we'll do that one for sure. A lot to say about that. Ingrid,
I pick on what you said about the 72 hours as well, but I think what that really reflects is respecting each other's space and each other's bubbles, let's say, that some people can take more of each other, some people need to withdraw. And withdrawing doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care, but some people need to recharge batteries. I mean, it's understanding these different qualities and differences, and not being so fast and quick to interpret as someone who's not interested in us or somebody who is more interested in us. It's understanding the space that comes in between and what each person needs really and truly to charge themselves. Some people need to be around people a lot and they can take it, and others need to run off and have some time alone before they can reconnect. So that's something that we need to be sensitive to, I think, which then, of course, connects to communication too.
And just to touch on that, I think it really touched on my soul, because I think sometimes we think that need to recharge and to withdraw is an insult. It's a personal insult, and it's not, because it comes back to what Sarah was saying about you want to give the best to your family member, and if you need to withdraw and recharge and realign your thought process so that you're not fight and flight and you're not doing all of this and you can give the very best, you just need to do that.
Yes.
And it's nothing personal. Emma, you have the last word, my love.
Oh.
Okay, so your last piece of advice, bearing in mind that you sat in the car with your husband and got really effed off.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that, like, kind of don't expect to be a perfect human being. It's not about being a perfect mom or a perfect partner or a perfect sibling. It's about learning, and I think it is also about keeping in mind, are you playing a short-term game or a long-term game? And I think that if you listened to the podcast until this point, you're obviously playing a long-term. Otherwise, they would have switched, So it's about, like, kind of choosing where you're going to invest your energy, what you're going to learn, like what do you want to learn more about, and relationships take learning and actioning that learning, because knowledge is potential power, action is power. So that's my advice.
Brilliant advice. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank
What
you
a
for
great
having us.
conversation.
Thank you. Amazing. And for your tips.
Chin chin.
Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed. What a great show.
It was so much fun.